Aulus is suddenly everywhere again. After years of being labeled as one of the most forgotten fighters in Mobile Legends, the April 2026 revamp completely changed how players look at him. Ranked games are starting to fill with Aulus jungle picks, XP lane experiments, and even late-game hypercarry comps built entirely around his new power spikes. And now, players are asking the same question. Did Moonton accidentally create one of the strongest scaling fighters in the current meta? Welcome back to Mobile Legends News. Before the revamp, Aulus had a very clear problem. He scaled incredibly hard into the late game, but getting there felt painful. His early jungle clear was vulnerable, his mobility was limited, and coordinated teams could easily shut him down before he even becomes a threat. In older metas filled with fast rotations, aggressive invades, and mobility-heavy assassins, Aulus simply struggled to keep up. The April 2026 revamp was designed to modernize that identity without removing what made him unique. Instead of being a slow farming liability, the new Aulus now has a stronger engage potential, smoother movement options, and much more reliable presence in early skirmishes and mid-game teamfights. The biggest reason why Revamped Aulus suddenly feels relevant again is because Moonton didn't just buff his numbers. They completely changed the pacing of how the hero functions. The old version of Aulus had one very obvious identity. Farm for 10 minutes, reach late game, then hope your opponents couldn't kite you forever. If he fell behind early in the match, it often felt impossible after. In faster metas filled with assassins, utility junglers, and high mobility XP laners, Aulus simply couldn't keep up with the tempo of the game. The April 2026 revamp directly targeted those weaknesses. According to the official patch directions shown in the advanced server and original server notes, the developers specifically wanted to reduce his over-reliance on basic attacks and improve his pursuit ability and team fight presence. And honestly, you can immediately feel those changes the moment you play him. The first massive improvement is mobility. Old Aulus had one of the biggest problems any fighter can have in modern MLBB. He struggled to stay on targets. Even when he reached late game, enemies with dashes or slows could easily disengage from him. That made him extremely matchup dependent. But the revamped version finally has real sticking power. His updated skills now let him chase far more aggressively, especially during extended fights. The revamp added movement-focused mechanics that allowed Aulus to reposition while staying threatening instead of simply walking towards enemies and hoping they don't escape. Multiple advanced server patches repeatedly adjusted his dash potential, movement speed, and chase tools before release, which clearly shows how important pursuit became in his redesigned philosophy. That alone already changes how he plays in jungle fights. Before the revamp, invading with Aulus was risky because he lacked fast engage options. Now, he can actually pressure backliners during mid-game skirmishes instead of waiting for opponents to walk to him. This matters a lot in the 2026 meta, where positioning and quick rotations are everything. Heroes that cannot instantly threaten carries often fall behind in priority, especially in higher ranks. But mobility is only half the story. The real game changer is the addition of crowd control immunity mechanics. This is probably the biggest reason why players are suddenly taking the hero seriously again. One of the oldest weaknesses of Aulus was how easy he was to shut down. Crowd control absolutely destroyed him. A single stun, suppression, knockup, or slow could completely stop his momentum because most of his damage depended on continuously attacking. Once interrupted, he became useless for several seconds. The revamped version fixes that by giving him access to CC immunity windows during combat. Official adjustments from the advanced server even emphasize preserving his immunity interaction during his skill usage. And in practical gameplay, this feels huge. Instead of being a sitting target during engages, Aulus can now brute force his way through certain frontline abilities and continue pressuring enemy carries. Against teams relying heavily on chain crowd control, he feels dramatically more reliable than ever before. That doesn't mean he's unkillable though, far from it. But he finally has the tools that allow him to function in coordinated fights. This also shifts how players build him. Old Aulus was often forced into hyper-basic attack setups where the goal was simply maximizing late-game DPS. The new version still benefits heavily from attack speed and sustained damage, but now players are experimenting with bruiser-oriented builds much more frequently. Instead of acting like a stationary scaling fighter, Revamped Aulus behaves more like a hybrid diver. That hybrid identity is honestly the most interesting part of his redesign. Moonton described him as a sustained fighter who weaves basic attacks between skills, and that description perfectly explains the new gameplay loop. The old version basically spammed enhanced basic attacks non-stop. The new version actively encourages skill weaving, repositioning, and timing. You're no longer just auto-attacking endlessly. You're constantly cycling abilities to maintain pressure, refresh enhanced attacks, and extend combat presence. That makes him mechanically more engaging, while also making him less predictable. In actual ranked games, this creates a much more aggressive mid-game presence. Previously, Aulus was often invisible until late game. Now, he can contribute meaningfully much earlier in the match. Community reactions from advanced server testing repeatedly pointed out that his early to mid-game pressure feels far stronger compared to the old version. And honestly, that change alone might be enough to keep him relevant. Modern MLBB metas heavily reward heroes that can fight around turtle objectives, rotate quickly, and threaten early skirmishes. Pure late-game scaling is much weaker than it used to be, because games snowball much faster now. If your hero spends too much time farming, your team can lose control of the map before you ever scale. Revamped Aulus avoids that problem much better. His improved chase tools and active combat mechanics let him contest objectives earlier without feeling completely useless. In jungle specifically, players are noticing faster clears and more consistent pressure around neutral objectives. Some community discussions even described him as viable across multiple lanes because of the flexibility created by the redesign. That flexibility is extremely important in the current meta. Heroes with role versatility tend to stay relevant longer because they adapt better to draft situations. Aulus now feels less locked into one predictable playstyle. XP lane works, jungle works, and even certain aggressive gold lane matchups can even function situationally. That unpredictability makes drafting against him more complicated than before. Of course, the revamp is not universally praised. Some players believe the hero still has flaws that stop him from becoming truly top tier. One recurring criticism is sustain. Community discussions repeatedly mention that despite the mobility and CC improvements, Aulus can still struggle against heavy sustained fighters like Yu Zhong or Esmeralda during extended lane trades. And honestly, that criticism is fair. The hero now survives through aggression and pressure rather than pure healing durability. If he gets bursted after engaging, he can still collapse quickly. Some players also feel that managing his passive stacks and timing remains awkward compared to more straightforward meta fighters. But here's the thing, even those criticisms actually prove the revamp succeeded. Why? Because people are finally debating whether Aulus is strong instead of ignoring him completely. That's a massive difference. Before April 2026, Aulus barely existed in serious discussions. He was viewed as outdated, niche, and heavily dependent on favorable circumstances. Now, players are actively experimenting with builds, arguing about lane viability, discussing item synergies, and testing him in rank. That alone shows the revamp achieved its biggest goal, making the hero relevant again. And the current meta genuinely helps him. The recent shift towards durable bruisers, objective-heavy gameplay, and extended frontline fights gives Aulus more room to operate. Marksman durability adjustments and battlefield pacing changes also indirectly benefit aggressive fighters that can consistently pressure backlines. Aulus thrives in chaotic extended fights where enemies cannot instantly disengage. Once he sticks onto a target, his sustained pressure becomes overwhelming. Combined with improved engagement tools and CC resistance, he now feels significantly more threatening during Lord dances and late-game objective contests. But the scariest part here is that players are probably still optimizing him. This happens almost every time a major MLBB revamp launches. During the first few weeks, most players focus on obvious builds and standard strategies. But once high-ranked players and pro teams start discovering optimized emblem setups, jungle paths, and team competitions, heroes can evolve rapidly. And that's exactly why Revamped Aulus feels dangerous now. He already looks strong while people are still learning him. If the player base fully figures out the best way to abuse this hybrid bruiser identity, the hero could easily become one of the most defining fighters in this current MLBB patch. Revamped Aulus honestly feels like one of the biggest glow-ups among recent MLBB fighter reworks. Compared to the old version, he's faster, more active, and far more capable of contributing before late game. His mobility upgrades, improved chase potential, and CC resistance finally let him function in modern teamfights instead of falling behind the pace of the match. But despite all of the improvements, he still isn't flawless. Sustained heavy fighters can outlast him. Mobile heroes can still kite him if he misplays, and his effectiveness heavily depends on engaging at the correct moment. Even so, for the first time in years, Aulus genuinely feels competitive again. So, what do you think? Is Revamped Aulus actually strong enough to become part of the real meta, or is the hype just coming from the excitement of a fresh rework? And right now, where do you think he performs best? XP lane or jungle? Drop your builds, combos, and opinions in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Mobile Legends News for more MLBB updates, patch breakdowns, and meta discussions. Till next time!